Buddha's radical truth. It's what you do, not what you are. When you first look at a teaching like dependent co-arising, it seems very abstract and very far away from anything you might be doing in the practice. But if you look at it more carefully, you see that it makes a whole series of important statements that have an immediate bearing on what you're doing right here. To begin with, when the Buddha talks about the causes of suffering, he doesn't trace it back to what you are. He doesn't say you suffer because you're basically bad or because you're basically good, but somehow have been socially conditioned to forget your true inner goodness. He comes back instead to what you do. That right there is a radical statement, and it opens huge possibilities. It's hard to change what you are, but you can change your actions simply through knowledge, through understanding which things you do are going to cause suffering, which states of mind lead to suffering. You can look for those, and you can change them. To the extent the Buddha does talk about what you are, it's far along the path of dependent co-arising, way up there in what's called bhava, or becoming. It's not a question of what you inherently are, good or bad. Very simply, your being comes about from what you do. That's the reverse of the way most of us think. Most of us think that our basic nature is a certain way, and we act in certain ways because of our basic nature. The Buddha says instead that what you are, in the sense of how you identify yourself on a sensual level, on the level of form or on a formless level, can be traced back to what you do. You can learn to do things in a more skillful way, which will lead to a change in your sense of what you are, and that in turn will be less and less likely to cause suffering. This is why the Buddha's teaching is a training, because the kind of ignorance it's meant to overcome is not an ignorance of what you are. It's simply a practical ignorance of which kinds of actions work for true happiness and which kinds don't. That's the basic principle of the Four Noble Truths. Each of the knowledges in the Four Noble Truths deals with a task that you develop as a skill. That in and of itself is another important statement. If the ignorance at the root of the problem were simply a matter of not knowing your true nature, it would be an all-or-nothing sort of thing. You'd know it, or you wouldn't. But skills can be developed gradually. Your sensitivity develops. Your dexterity at shaping things more skillfully, more appropriately, develops over time. So the path overcoming this practical ignorance isn't a sudden all-or-nothing sort of path. It's a gradual path, a gradual training in gaining more and more skill. It's in this way that the teachings of dependent co-arising are directly connected to what you're doing right now. You're focusing on your breath. You're directing your thoughts to the breath and evaluating the breath. You use certain perceptions, and certain feelings get involved. These are all elements in the factor of fabrication, which comes right after ignorance. We breathe ignorantly. We perceive things through ignorance. Our thoughts about things, the way we evaluate things, and our use of language generally are done with ignorance. As a result, we suffer. But if you bring knowledge to these processes, they can actually become a healing kind of fabrication. After all, the path is a path of fabrication. The Buddha doesn't tell you just to drop all activity at once, to be totally passive or totally devoid of any kind of intention. We hear that the goal at the end of the path is to be free from fabrication, so we think we'll just stop fabricating and that should get us there. But the mind can't do that. The path doesn't work that way. The intention to stop fabricating is itself an intention. You can get very much attached to that kind of passivity and still be stuck with all your problems. So instead, we bring more and more knowledge to the process of breathing and how we use our thoughts around the process of breathing. Sometimes you hear that our thinking, which is based a lot on language, is the reason why we suffer, that we picked up these bad social influences that taught us to think in dualistic terms or whatever, so we've got to drop language entirely. But again, that's not the Buddha's approach. He says that if you use language in ignorance, you're going to suffer. But the problem is not with language, it's with the ignorance. I was talking to a Hindu monk a while back, and he told me his response to someone who came up to him and asked, "How can we get beyond duality?" His response was, "What's wrong with duality? You're talking to me, aren't you?" Language is useful because it makes distinctions. If you couldn't make distinctions, how could we communicate? What would our language be like? It would be like speaking in tongues at a Pentecostal church. Bah! Who knows what it means? It doesn't mean anything, or could mean everything, which is a totally useless language. The mind has to make distinctions. We feel distinctions. We have a sense of right and wrong, not simply because we're taught them by society. It's a deeply ingrained habit that comes from our sense that some things are painful and some things are not, and you've got to do something about the things that are painful. This goes deep into our sense of feeling and perception, mental fabrications that are often pre-linguistic. Deep down inside, we know that anything that threatens our existence is bad, anything that helps it is good. Even lizards know this much. That's why it's embedded in the lizard brain, a very strong sense of lizard good and lizard bad. The hatred of pain, the love of pleasure, the ability to perceive an enemy, to perceive an escape from an enemy. These are really basic to the mind, much prior to any kind of social conditioning. Our social conditioning, our more refined uses of language, are actually needed to mitigate some of those lizard fears and knee-jerk judgments. So instead of throwing out language or throwing out our social conditioning, we learn how to use them more skillfully. And working with the breath is an ideal place to start. You give space to the mind by breathing in a way that feels good. You can use your linguistic habits to talk to yourself about the breath. How does this breath feel? How does that breath feel? Where would it feel good to breathe right now? Which part of the body needs a larger dose of good breath energy? In this way, you get more and more in touch with the immediate feeling of your body so that your linguistic habits can show immediate benefits. It feels good to breathe this way. It feels good to breathe that way. Your mind and your body are getting more intimate so that all the levels of fabrication, physical, verbal, and mental, start working together around a common sense of well-being. In this way, they get to communicate with one another. The process of focusing on the breath in a skillful way is really a healing process. Each time you sit down to meditate, don't think of it as a chore. Think of it as an opportunity to do some more healing work. And don't think of it as a time when you're obliged to stop thinking. In the beginning, you have to use directed thought and evaluation to get things to settle down, to adjust things, to get everybody together. And when everyone is together like this, interesting things come up. Hidden feelings, hidden perceptions suddenly show themselves, and you can work through them. It's almost like dealing with a person who's possessed. The possessed person, from the point of view of Western psychology, is a schizophrenic. There are two different personalities in the one person. From a more traditional perspective, there really are two different people in there. The problem is that they're not cooperating. They're working at cross purposes. If they can learn to cooperate, there's no problem. Who cares whether there are 2 or 20 people in there? If they get along, the problem is gone. That's how Ajahn Fuang approached cases of spirit possession. Instead of driving out the spirit, he'd negotiate with it so that it would stop interfering in the possessed person's life. We have the same sort of problem even though we may seem normal. Our directed thoughts and evaluations tend to work at cross purposes. The way we feel and our different perceptions can be running off in every direction at once. This is why we have to meditate. To work with the breath is to create a space where all the different parts of the mind, all the different members of the committee, all the different levels of sensation and activity going on, learn how to be with one another in a peaceful spot, working on a common goal. You're showing goodwill for one another because you're cooperating. In that way, interesting things come up and you can deal with them. You can learn new habits in how you relate to your body. new habits in how you think, how you frame an issue in the mind, and how you work through the difficulties in whatever issues you encounter. When you learn how to deal with all the parts of yourself in a healthy way like this, it's a lot easier then to start dealing in a healthy way with other people too. So the breath meditation not only helps you, it also helps everybody else you live with because it gives you paradigms. For one thing, it gives you immediate training in how to employ the Brahma Viharas, the sublime attitudes of limitless goodwill, limitless compassion, limitless empathetic joy, limitless equanimity. In other words, you start out with goodwill for yourself, allowing yourself to breathe in a comfortable way. When you see that your breathing is uncomfortable, or that the way you think is causing dis-ease in the body or the mind, you have compassion for yourself. Let's try to figure out a better way to do this. When it's going well, you don't start feeding on the idea that you're not worthy of this, or that you really shouldn't allow yourself to feel this good. You try to maintain that sense of well-being, appreciate it. Let the ideas of deserving and not deserving just go by the boards. Again, those attitudes are usually based on an idea of what you are deep down inside, that you're the sort of person who deserves to be punished for things you did in the past. That's not how the Buddha's teachings work. Different actions will inevitably lead to different results. There's no question of anyone deserving to suffer. So, if you're able to maintain a sense of well-being, keep at it. If you're operating from a stable sense of well-being, you're going to start acting in more skillful ways all around. And then there's equanimity for the things that you can't change, the bad habits you aren't able to fully eradicate, or the problems that come in from past karma that you can't alter. The purpose of equanimity is to keep you focused on the things you can change, so that you don't waste energy focusing on the things you can't. In this way, as the members of your committee work together on the breath in a skillful way, you're gaining some training in what are essentially social virtues, the Brahma Viharas. Then you can apply the same lessons to your dealings with people around you. So instead of being a process of lobotomizing the mind so that you don't think, meditation is actually training and learning how to think in more skillful ways, how to act in more skillful ways, with knowledge, with an understanding of actions and their results. In particular, it's training and learning how to distinguish the types of activities in the mind that would cause a particular situation to produce suffering or not. In the course of this training, the question of who you are gets put aside. The question of who you've been gets put aside. You can focus purely on what you're doing, what you can do to train yourself to be more sensitive and more effective in bringing about an end to suffering, and what you can do to master activities that lead more and more to true happiness. After all, the issue is not what you are, it's what you do. And if what you do is not skillful, you can learn to make it more skillful with each in and out breath. Those are some of the lessons that you can derive from what seems like a very abstract teaching on dependent co-arising. It is abstract. It's put out as a list, and it's a very convoluted one. As the Buddha himself admitted, it's not simple. It's like a tangled bird's nest, he said, or a knotted ball of string. But you can pull on a few strands, pull out a few of the twigs, and you find that even the individual strands and twigs are really helpful in putting an end to suffering, teaching you how to think and act and even breathe in ways that can bring suffering to an end. How to change. When the Buddha describes the steps in dependent co-arising, on the one hand, he's describing how suffering happens, the psychology that goes into how we shape the present moment in a way that leads to suffering. But he's also describing the psychology of his listeners as they're listening to him, the rhetorical situation he finds himself in as he tries to teach them how to train themselves. You get an idea of what he's trying to accomplish by seeing how he understands what his listeners are doing right then and there, And the primary thing they're doing is that they're fabricating their experience in ignorance. There are three kinds of fabrication: bodily, verbal, and mental. On the large scale, that refers to bodily karma, verbal karma, and mental karma as they give results in this lifetime and on into the next. But in the present moment, the three fabrications get boiled down to what leads to bodily, verbal, mental karma on the large scale. And here, the Buddha gives different definitions. Bodily fabrication is the in and out breathing. If you weren't breathing, you couldn't do anything physically. Verbal fabrication is directed thought and evaluation, how you talk to yourself. You direct your thoughts to a topic and you make comments about it. You may ask questions about it, and when you've thought in those ways, that's when you open your mouth to speak. Finally, mental fabrications are perceptions and feelings, the labels you put on things, the feeling tones you have. These are the building blocks for all mental karma. So, as the Buddha's teaching you, he's noticing that the way you talk to yourself, the way you breathe, the way you hold different feelings and perceptions in the mind is causing you to suffer, and he wants you to change. He's trying to teach you how to fabricate in a new way right then and there. That's why the primary meditation exercise he taught was breath meditation, telling you to tell yourself to breathe like this, to breathe like that. When you tell yourself these things, what's that? That's verbal fabrication. You may say, "I've been breathing this old way. It's perfectly good." Well, it's good enough, but just good enough to keep you alive. You can breathe in a new way that does more than just keep you alive. It can help you develop qualities of mind that would be useful, at the very least, so that you can fabricate with knowledge and can see all the various layers in the mind where it sides with the defilements that are out to destroy your true happiness. He's also teaching new ways to talk to yourself. This is why we have all those suttas. You get the Buddha discussing the Dhamma with people, and often you see them display their defilements. The Buddha argues with them, cajoles them, brings them to their senses. He's showing you, this is how you can use your verbal fabrication, how to talk to yourself to get past your defilements. He doesn't give in easily to the defilements of his listeners. In fact, he doesn't give in at all. If you find yourself talking in ways that seem to side with your defilements, the traits of the mind that would pull you down, realize that you're engaged in an unskillful conversation inside, and the Buddha's giving you some inner conversation tips. This is how you can talk to yourself in new ways, more skillful ways. You may say, "That's not the way I usually talk to myself." But again, do you want to keep on talking to yourself in your old ways, or do you want to try something better? Think of the Ajahns in Thailand. They like to focus on the tendency for a lot of people to say, "I don't have the vasana, I don't have the character traits, I don't have the parami, I don't have the perfections from the past in order to practice." We here in the West don't tend to think in those terms, but we think the same kind of thought in other terms. We tend to think about our childhood issues, psychological scars from the past. We say, "This emotional scar is going to make it impossible for me to practice." The Ajahns would always tell their listeners, it's not the scars, it's not the past that's getting in the way. It's your attitude right now, what you're telling yourself. You're placing limitations on yourself, and you don't have to. This is where it's good to look at the issue of allure and drawbacks. What's the allure of your old way of talking to yourself? For one, it lets you off the hook. The fact that I can't practice is not my fault. You can pin it on something in the past, but there are better ways of thinking because that way of thinking gives you no future. You can think in ways that have a future. They may not be the sort of things you're used to saying to yourself, and part of you may say, "I don't believe this because it seems so artificial." But it's artificial simply because you're not accustomed to it. Your unskillful ways are equally artificial. It's just that they've been around for such a long time that you're used to them like an old shoe. Your foot has gotten used to the shoe even though the shoe may twist your foot or be too tight. The Buddha's saying, here's a shoe that will help you walk straight, help you walk in a healthy way, help your posture. Try it on. At first it feels weird, but then you realize after a while that if you train yourself in the new way, it does have its benefits. As the Buddha said, if it weren't possible to change your habits, he wouldn't have taught. If it weren't good for you to develop skillful habits, he wouldn't have taught that either. So he has faith in you. The question is, when are you going to pick up some of that faith and apply it to yourself? You hear it again and again. I can't do this. It's not working. Well, if it's not working right now, that's because you haven't got the hang of it yet. The past doesn't necessarily have to predict the future. After all, we do have this ability to change, and this area of change is a good thing. You simply need some patience and persistence in sticking with the new habit. So look at how the Buddha talks to defilements. That's what a lot of his companions in conversation in the suttas are. They're representing a defilement. If it's not delusional, sometimes it's anger, sometimes it's greed, sometimes it's unskillful desires of other kinds. As you watch the conversation, you come to see, this is how the Buddha handles these people. This is how he handles these defilements. It gives some idea of how you can apply that same approach yourself. This is one of the reasons why, in addition to the suttas, we also read the teachings of the Ajahns. They've had to argue with their own defilements. You read Ajahn Fuang, and he gives you a lot of quick karate chops to use with your defilements, karate chops he had used with his own. So it's good to adopt them, to see if they work for you. If they don't work for you, you have every right to think, well, what would work? But these examples are showing that it can be done, and it's important that you have trust in the principle that this can be done. You don't have any problems in your mind that have never been solved before. When you read the verses of the elder monks and nuns, you see people who were desperate, people who were suicidal, people who were proud, people who didn't believe in themselves, people with all kinds of issues, and you see how they were able to overcome them. A lot of it has to do with having trust in learning how to talk to yourself in new ways. The same with mental fabrication. All those analogies that the Buddha uses throughout the text to describe things are teaching you new ways to perceive things. The piece of cloth that's dirty in one spot, but clean in another, that's the perception for someone who's got some good habits and some bad habits, someone who's been good to you in some ways and not good to you in others. The image is showing you that you can take the clean part of the cloth and leave the dirty part behind. The Ajahns, too. Many of them are masters of the analogies, and we listen to them, we read them, because they're giving us new ways of applying perceptions to our problems. Here again, you may say, well, that's not the way I do it. But okay, are you satisfied with the way you do things? Are you happy with the way you do things? Where's your fighting spirit? Habits can be changed, old habits can be dropped, new habits can be developed. It takes time. It takes effort, but it's time and effort well spent. Think of the image that Ajahn Mun gave in his last Dhamma talk. The soldier in your mind is the desire not to come back and be the laughingstock of the defilements ever again. Your discernment is the soldier's weapon, concentration, mindfulness. These are the food and other supporting factors for the soldier. Learn to think of yourself in those terms. If you've been victimized in the past, you don't have to stay in the role of victim. You can show yourself and others that you can rise above that. Think in those terms. That too is a perception you can use. At the same time, based on the fact that you've been breathing in a new way, you have new feelings. After all, the Buddha doesn't say just to stick with whatever feeling comes up. You replace unskillful feelings with more skillful ones. There's household grief and there's household joy. There's renunciate grief and renunciate joy. These aren't things that simply arise willy-nilly. There are potentials for them to arise, and what you do with those potentials will determine what feeling you're going to feel. The Buddha's telling you to replace one kind of feeling with another feeling. Replace household grief with renunciate grief. The realization that there is a goal. Other people have attained it, you haven't attained it. There's a grief that goes along with that because you realize, gosh, it's a lot of work. But that's better than just going back and forth between household grief and household joy and household grief again. At least this new kind of grief offers hope. It offers a way out so that you can arrive at renunciate joy, the joy that comes with discerning the goal. So again, feelings are things you can create. You're already creating them. It's just that your habitual ways of creating them are causing suffering. But you can change. As you look at the Buddha's teachings, see that he's teaching in a way that's just right for people who are fabricating in unskillful ways, and who need directions in how to fabricate in new ways with the realization that it is possible to change. Then you can apply the lessons to yourself. We're not stuck in our old ways unless we keep ourselves stuck. We have the choice. The Buddha's giving you some instructions on how to take advantage of that power of choice to fabricate your experience skillfully. And there's nothing to keep you from trying those recommendations out. The lessons of fabrication. 3 passages in the canon, one in SN 4716, one in SN 4740, the other in MN 118, and at least 5 other discourses, explain how the establishing of mindfulness is to be cultivated and developed. The first passage sets out the prerequisites for properly establishing mindfulness. Then, Uttiya. It would be good, Lord, if the Blessed One would teach me the Dhamma in brief so that, having heard the Dhamma from the Blessed One, I might dwell alone, secluded, heedful, ardent, and resolute. The Buddha. In that case, Uttiya, purify the very basis with regard to skillful qualities. And what is the basis of skillful qualities? Well-purified virtue and views made straight. Then, when your virtue is well purified and your views made straight, in dependence on virtue, established in virtue, you should develop the 4 establishings of mindfulness. Then, when in dependence on virtue, established in virtue, you develop these 4 establishings of mindfulness, you will go beyond the realm of death. Descend 47:16. We have already noted the importance of right view, views made straight, as a prerequisite for right mindfulness. This passage adds to the list of prerequisites the path factors related to virtue, which MN 44 identifies as right speech, right action, and right livelihood. It's not hard to see why these factors would be required for mindfulness to become right. If you engage in harmful behavior, you'll want to forget the harm you have done. This forgetfulness puts barriers in your memory that are sure to weaken mindfulness. A bad conscience can also weaken alertness, as you develop a tendency not to want to look carefully into your motivations for acting. N369. This is why mindfulness can be established rightly only in dependence on virtuous behavior. At the same time, a lack of virtue makes it difficult to gladden the mind, an important step in using mindfulness to develop right concentration. The second passage in the above list, SN 4740, sets a more encompassing framework for developing the establishing of mindfulness. And what is the development of the establishing of mindfulness? There is the case where a monk remains focused on the phenomenon of origination with regard to the body, remains focused on the phenomenon of passing away with regard to the body, remains focused on the phenomenon of origination and passing away with regard to the body, ardent, alert, and mindful, subduing greed and distress with reference to the world. He remains focused on the phenomenon of origination with regard to feelings, with regard to the mind, with regard to mental qualities, remains focused on the phenomenon of passing away with regard to mental qualities, remains focused on the phenomenon of origination and passing away with regard to mental qualities, ardent, alert, and mindful, subduing greed and distress with reference to the world. This is called the development of the establishing of mindfulness. And what is the path of practice to the development of the establishing of mindfulness? Just this noble eightfold path: right view, right resolve, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. This is called the path of practice to the development of the establishing of mindfulness. SN 4740. 2 points stand out here, one general and one specific. The general point is that right mindfulness has to be developed through the practice of all 8 factors of the path, including right effort and right concentration. This means that whereas right mindfulness leads to and acts as an integral part of right concentration, as noted in the preceding chapter, the development of right concentration in turn aids in the development of right mindfulness. In other words, each supports the other in strengthening the path. This point is confirmed by the standard descriptions of the 4 jhanas, which state that the 4th jhana is the stage at which mindfulness becomes pure. The more specific point lies in what this passage adds to the standard Satipatthana formula. The fact that the development of the establishing of mindfulness lies in remaining focused, in each of the 4 frameworks, on the phenomenon of origination, passing away, and origination and passing away with reference to that particular frame. The phrasing of this passage contains 2 details worth noticing. First is the use of the locative case to express the idea of origination in reference to each of these 4 frames. SN 4742, using the genitive case, a grammatical case that indicates possession, identifies the origination of each of these objects, nutriment as the origination of the body, contact as the origination of feeling, name and form as the origination of mind, and attention as the origination of mental qualities. But that's not what you're being told to look for here. Instead of looking for the origination of your frame, you watch origination and passing away of phenomena as viewed in reference to or in the context of that frame. In other words, while maintaining any of the 4 frames of reference as a framework for your attention, you keep watch over how events arise from causes and how they pass away, all with reference to that frame. This is particularly clear in the context of the body. You aren't interested in looking just at the role of food in sustaining the body, for that would trivialize the practice. Instead, you watch how the experience of the body has an impact on the origination and passing away of physical or mental phenomena experienced in the present, and how their origination and passing away have an impact on the body. A similar principle applies to the other frames of reference as well. For example, with feelings, you notice how the way you breathe influences feelings of pleasure or pain, or how feelings of pleasure or pain influence states of mind. The second important detail to notice is that this passage uses the term origination, samudaya. This is sometimes mistranslated as arising, giving the impression that you simply watch passively as phenomena come and go. However, the word samudaya actually carries the meaning of causation, which means that you must also ferret out exactly what is causing those phenomena to come and go. As any scientist knows, establishing a causal relationship involves more than simply watching. You have to make experimental changes in your environment to test what is and is not affecting the phenomenon in which you're interested. If, for example, you suspect that the temperature of your room is having an impact on your health, you have to raise or lower the thermostat to see what effect that has on how healthy you feel. Similarly, to keep watch on the origination of phenomena with reference, say, to the sense of the body, you have to make adjustments in your physical and mental actions to see what is actually causing what. This observation is borne out by 5 passages in the discourses. The first is that, as SN 4740 shows, the process of remaining focused on the origination of phenomena is developed by cultivating all the path factors, and especially the practice of right concentration. Now, right concentration requires consciously shaping the state of your mind. Through the process of learning what works and what doesn't work in giving rise to the khandhas, you gain hands-on experience in manipulating the causes of the mental phenomena you are trying to develop or abandon. This is how the process of origination becomes clear. This point is confirmed by the passages from AN 870 and MN 125 that we noted in Chapter 1 can be read as illustrating the development of the establishing of mindfulness. As these passages point out, you deepen the level of concentration attained in the first stage of mindfulness practice by consciously dropping layers of thought and refining the feelings that result from establishing mindfulness. This requires hands-on familiarity with the patterns of causation at work in the processes of the mind, a familiarity that can come only by manipulating those processes to achieve the desired effect. The fourth passage illustrating the need for the manipulation of causal factors is the simile of the cook, SN 47:8, which we encountered in Chapter 1. The cook has to keep varying his food to find exactly what pleases his master. Otherwise, his master will tire of his cooking and stop giving him rewards. In the same way, as a meditator, you have to keep adjusting physical and mental phenomena to provide the mind with just the right conditions for settling down. This can be accomplished only by actively exploring cause and effect. The fact that the process of origination is understood through the manipulation of causal factors is also borne out by a fifth passage, in MN 118, in which the Buddha explains how the establishing of mindfulness is to be cultivated and developed. In this case, his instructions are more specific, showing the precise way in which his approach to meditation is proactive and experimental. The passage starts by describing 16 steps in breath meditation, and then shows how each tetrad or set of 4 steps brings one of the 4 establishings of mindfulness to the culmination of its development. We will consider the full passage in more detail in Chapters 6 and 7. Here I would like to focus on the steps themselves and the establishing of mindfulness that each tetrad develops. I have put the steps in boldface so that you can easily locate them again when you want to remind yourself of what each step entails. The steps developing the first establishing of mindfulness. Breathing in long, he discerns, I am breathing in long, or breathing out long, he discerns, I am breathing out long. Or breathing in short, he discerns, I am breathing in short, or breathing out short, he discerns, I am breathing out short. He trains himself, I will breathe in sensitive to the entire body. He trains himself, I will breathe out sensitive to the entire body. He trains himself, I will breathe in calming bodily fabrication. He trains himself, I will breathe out calming bodily fabrication. The steps developing the second establishing of mindfulness. He trains himself, I will breathe in sensitive to rapture. He trains himself, I will breathe out sensitive to rapture. He trains himself, I will breathe in sensitive to pleasure. He trains himself, I will breathe out sensitive to pleasure. He trains himself, I will breathe in sensitive to mental fabrication. He trains himself, I will breathe out sensitive to mental fabrication. He trains himself, I will breathe in calming mental fabrication. He trains himself, I will breathe out calming mental fabrication. The steps developing the third establishing of mindfulness. He trains himself, I will breathe in sensitive to the mind. He trains himself, I will breathe out sensitive to the mind. He trains himself, I will breathe in gladdening the mind. He trains himself, I will breathe out gladdening the mind. He trains himself, I will breathe in steadying the mind. He trains himself. I will breathe out, steadying the mind. He trains himself. I will breathe in, releasing the mind. He trains himself. I will breathe out, releasing the mind. The steps developing the fourth establishing of mindfulness. Asi, he trains himself. I will breathe in, focusing on inconstancy. He trains himself. I will breathe out, focusing on inconstancy. He trains himself. I will breathe in, focusing on dispassion, literally fading. He trains himself. I will breathe out, focusing on dispassion. Wab. He trains himself. I will breathe in, focusing on cessation. He trains himself. I will breathe out, focusing on cessation. He trains himself. I will breathe in, focusing on relinquishment. He trains himself. I will breathe out, focusing on relinquishment. MN 118. What stands out most prominently in this list of steps is the amount of willed, proactive activity they involve. Steps 3 through 16 are all described as acts of self-training, in which you set the intention to breathe in a particular way and, while consciously breathing, to pay attention to a particular topic with the purpose of developing it in a particular direction. You're not simply aware of what's happening in the present moment, for each training is expressed in the future tense. I will breathe. You want to move the present moment into a particular future direction. This is how these 16 steps develop not only mindfulness and alertness, but also their companion quality of ardency. Intention and the role of fabrication figures explicitly in steps 4, 7, and 8. The terms bodily fabrication, kaya sankara, and mental fabrication, citta sankara, used in those steps are explained as follows. Sister Dhammadina. In and out breaths are bodily fabrications. Directed thought and evaluation are verbal fabrications. Perceptions and feelings are mental fabrications. MN 44. This means that in step 4, you deliberately try to calm the breath. In step 8, after sensitizing yourself to the effect of perceptions and feelings on the mind in step 7, you try to cultivate perceptions and feelings that will have a calming effect. And although verbal fabrication is not mentioned by name in any of the steps, the use of the training phrase, I will breathe, is in itself an example of using verbal fabrication skillfully. So all 3 forms of fabrication play a role in these 16 steps. The proactive nature of these steps is also clear in steps 10 through 12, in which you try to move your mind in a skillful direction, gladdening it when its energy is low, steadying it when its energy is scattered or uneven, and releasing it, at least temporarily, from unskillful mind states, or from the factors of the lower stages of concentration so as to move it to higher stages. Similarly, in steps 13-16, you direct the mind in an even more skillful direction by focusing it on topics that will lead step by step to full release. The Buddha was clearly conscious of the proactive nature of these 16 steps, for he explicitly recommended them as superior to a more passive and equanimous approach to mindfulness of breathing. The Blessed One said, "Monks, do you develop mindfulness of in and out breathing?" When this was said, Ven Aritha replied to the Blessed One, "I develop mindfulness of in and out breathing, Lord." But how do you develop mindfulness of in and out breathing, Aritha? Having abandoned sensual desire for past sensual pleasures, Lord, having done away with sensual desire for future sensual pleasures, and having thoroughly subdued perceptions of irritation with regard to internal and external events, I breathe in mindfully and breathe out mindfully. There is that mindfulness of in and out breathing, Aritha. I don't say that there isn't. But as to how mindfulness of in and out breathing is brought in detail to its culmination, listen and pay close attention. I will speak. The Buddha then details the 16 steps. SN 54-6. The commentary reads Aritha's statement here as indicating he has reached the third level of awakening, non-return, where all sensuality and irritation have been totally abandoned. But the fact that Aritha has to subdue irritation here shows that he hasn't totally abandoned it. In fact, from what we know of him from other discourses in the canon, such as MN 22, where he refuses to abandon a pernicious wrong view, it's highly improbable that he has reached any high level of attainment. A more likely interpretation is that he's simply practicing mindful equanimity in the present moment, having temporarily subdued desire for past and future sensual pleasures, and having temporarily subdued any thought of irritation with regard to the present. The important point here is that, although this relatively passive approach counts as a type of mindfulness of breathing, the Buddha does not recommend it. Instead, he recommends the more active approach of the 16 steps. His reasons for doing so relate to issues in right concentration, right effort, and right view, the three factors of the path that, as we have seen, interact most directly with right mindfulness. We will focus on the issues related to right view in the next chapter, and those related to right concentration and right effort here. Although bear in mind that right view is inevitably connected with these issues as well. First, with regard to right concentration, SN 54.8 states that the practice of the 16 steps develops not only the 4 establishings of mindfulness, but also all the levels of right concentration. Now, according to Intent 71, 2 mental qualities are necessary for the development of the 4 jhanas: tranquility, samatha, and insight, vipassana. If a monk would wish, may I attain, whenever I want, without strain, without difficulty, the 4 jhanas that are heightened mental states, pleasant abidings in the here and now, then he should be one who brings the precepts to perfection, who is committed to inner tranquility of awareness, who does not neglect jhana, who is endowed with insight, and who frequents empty dwellings. In 1071. And 494 describes tranquility as resulting from the ability to steady the mind, settle it down, unify it, and concentrate it. It describes insight as the understanding that comes from investigating fabrications in an appropriate way. Notice that these 2 qualities, tranquility and insight, are just that, qualities. Nowhere in the canon are they referred to as specific meditation exercises. Instead, they are described as qualities used by and developed through the exercises leading to jhana. The 16 steps are a primary example of how this can happen, in that they give hands-on experience both with settling the mind and with investigating fabrication in the steps where you consciously calm bodily and mental fabrication. In this way, they develop tranquility and insight in tandem, and 4's 170. As we will have occasion to note throughout this book, a distinctive feature of the Buddha's approach is that he often has you employ as tools on the path physical and mental processes that he also wants you to contemplate and comprehend in action. The practice of gaining sensitivity to fabrication by calming it to promote tranquility, insight, and right concentration is a prime example of this approach. As for the issues related to right effort, the Buddha recommends the more proactive approach of the 16 steps, because even though mindful equanimity is, in some cases, enough to uproot causes of stress, it's not enough in all. And how is striving fruitful? How is exertion fruitful? There is the case where a monk, when not loaded down, does not load himself down with pain, nor does he reject pleasure that accords with the Dhamma, although he is not fixated on that pleasure. He discerns that when I exert a fabrication against this cause of stress, then from the fabrication of exertion there is dispassion. When I look on with equanimity at that cause of stress, then from the development of equanimity there is dispassion. So he exerts a fabrication against the cause of stress, for which dispassion comes from the fabrication of exertion, and develops equanimity with regard to the cause of stress for which dispassion comes from the development of equanimity. Thus, the stress coming from the cause of stress for which there is dispassion through the fabrication of exertion is exhausted, and the stress resulting from the cause of stress for which there is dispassion through the development of equanimity is exhausted. MN 101. Notice that the Buddha offers no specific guidelines for when equanimity will work in giving rise to dispassion, and when the more proactive approach of exerting a fabrication or fabricating exertion is needed. This means that you have to discover from personal experience what works in a particular case and to employ the appropriate corrective. The role of mindfulness in these cases is to keep this range of options in mind and to remember what has previously worked in cases similar to what you are currently facing. Of the two main options, equanimity and the fabrication of exertion, the latter phrase appears elsewhere in the canon in the context of the four bases of power, Upādāna, which in turn are related to the practice of right concentration. There is the case where a monk develops the base of power endowed with concentration founded on desire and the fabrications of exertion. He develops the base of power endowed with concentration founded on persistence and the fabrications of exertion. He develops the base of power endowed with concentration founded on intent and the fabrications of exertion. He develops the base of power endowed with concentration founded on discrimination and the fabrications of exertion. SN 51:15. This indicates that the fabrication of exertion relates, at the very least, to the conscious effort needed to fabricate a state of right concentration. The canon doesn't explain which fabrications these passages are referring to, but there's every likelihood that all three types, bodily, verbal, and mental, are intended, as all three are required to develop strong concentration. As SN 3611 points out, verbal fabrication is present in the first jhana, bodily fabrication in the first three jhanas, and mental fabrication in all four jhanas and the first four formless dimensions based on the fourth jhana. This may explain why the 16 steps of breath meditation focus so much attention, explicit and implicit, on bodily, verbal, and mental fabrication. As concentration develops, all three types of fabrication are stilled: verbal fabrication in the second jhana, bodily fabrication in the fourth, and mental fabrication in the cessation of perception and feeling, an attainment that results, at the very least, in the third level of awakening, non-return. In this way, the skillful fabrication of exertion leads to the pacification of all fabrications, and so to release. The 16 steps of breath meditation, with their conscious calming of fabrication, are a clear embodiment of this approach. However, the three types of fabrication play a role not only in stilling the mind, but also in giving rise to dispassion for different causes of stress. Consciously breathing in a particular way to develop a sense of well-being would help make some causes of stress seem less appealing, for you would have an immediate sense of pleasure to measure them against. This would make it easier to feel dispassion for them. Directing your thoughts to a particular topic, as in the 6 recollections, see Chapter 7, and evaluating the matter would help engender dispassion for other causes of stress. Adjusting your feelings and perceptions, as in Step 8 of breath meditation, would help with others. In particular, many of the canon's passages on developing discernment recommend specific perceptions, such as the perceptions of inconstancy, stress, and not self, to develop the dispassion leading to release. This would count as a skillful use of mental fabrication. There are also cases where various combinations of these three types of fabrication would help in instilling dispassion for still other causes of stress. Because the 16 steps of breath meditation give practical experience in adjusting these types of fabrication, they cultivate a sensitivity to and dexterity in the process of fabrication, both of which aid in developing the full range of the skills needed to deal with any factor causing stress. As for equanimity, even though the passage from MN 101 contrasts it with the fabrication of exertion, we have to remember that it's a mental feeling, SN 3631, one of the 5 aggregates, khandha, and so it's a fabricated phenomenon. When used on the path, it differs from the fabrication of exertion only in that it requires much less effort. In fact, one of the important insights leading to release is that even subtle forms of equanimity are no less fabricated than mental states requiring much more energy. This point is borne out by the fact that when equanimity is employed instead of the fabrication of exertion, it's used with a particular purpose in mind, to abandon unskillful qualities. This means that it has an underlying agenda, the agenda of right effort, and is not totally free from preference. In fact, several passages in the canon, most prominently in the list of the 7 factors for awakening, SN 46-53, indicate that, in the interest of developing the path, equanimity has to be consciously developed through the fabrication of exertion, and ultimately, again through the fabrication of exertion, abandoned. To begin with, the ordinary equanimity of being non-reactive to sensory input should be supplanted with the consciously fabricated equanimity of the higher states of concentration. There is equanimity coming from multiplicity, dependent on multiplicity, and there is equanimity coming from singleness, dependent on singleness. And which is equanimity coming from multiplicity, dependent on multiplicity? There is equanimity with regard to forms, equanimity with regard to sounds, smells, tastes, tactile sensations, ideas. This is equanimity coming from multiplicity, dependent on multiplicity. And which is equanimity coming from singleness, dependent on singleness? There is equanimity dependent on the dimension of the infinitude of space, equanimity dependent on the dimension of the infinitude of consciousness, dependent on the dimension of nothingness, dependent on the dimension of neither perception nor non-perception. This is equanimity coming from singleness, dependent on singleness. By depending and relying on equanimity coming from singleness, dependent on singleness, abandon and transcend equanimity coming from multiplicity, dependent on multiplicity. Such is its abandoning, such its transcending. MN 137. For some reason, this passage does not list the equanimity of the 4th jhana under equanimity coming from singleness. This is strange, because the standard description of the 4 jhanas states that the 4th jhana is the stage where not only mindfulness, but also equanimity becomes pure. Also, MN 140 portrays the equanimity of the 4th jhana as then being applied to the formless dimensions so as to give rise to the formless attainments, which would mean that the equanimity of the formless attainments is identical with the equanimity of the 4th jhana. Whatever the case, even though the equanimity of these higher states of concentration is superior to ordinary equanimity at the senses, it can act as an object of clinging and so stand in the way of awakening. There is the case, Ananda, where a monk, having practiced in this way, thinking, "It any object of attention should not be, and it should not occur to me. It will not be. It will not occur to me. What has come to be that I abandon, obtains equanimity. He relishes that equanimity, welcomes it, remains fastened to it. As he relishes that equanimity, welcomes it, remains fastened to it, his consciousness is dependent on it, clings to it, is sustained by it. With clinging sustenance, ananda, a monk is not totally unbound. In clinging, where does that monk cling? The dimension of neither perception nor non-perception. Then indeed, in clinging, he clings to the supreme clinging. In clinging, ananda, he does cling to the supreme clinging. For this, the dimension of neither perception nor non-perception is the supreme clinging. There is, however, the case where a monk, having practiced in this way, it should not be, and it should not occur to me. It will not be, it will not occur to me. What is, what has come to be, that I abandon, obtains equanimity. He does not relish that equanimity, does not welcome it, does not remain fastened to it. As he doesn't relish that equanimity, doesn't welcome it, doesn't remain fastened to it, his consciousness isn't dependent on it, doesn't cling to, isn't sustained by it. Without clinging sustenance, ananda, a monk is totally unbound. MN 106. This is why MN 137, after discussing how equanimity coming from multiplicity should be abandoned by developing equanimity coming from singleness, states that equanimity coming from singleness should be abandoned by non-fashioning, atamayata, the ability to not fashion any sense of self or possession around that equanimity. By depending and relying on non-fashioning, abandon and transcend the equanimity coming from singleness, dependent on singleness. Such is its abandoning, such its transcending. MN 137. But a person of integrity notices the Blessed One has spoken of non-fashioning even with regard to the attainment of the dimension of neither perception nor non-perception, for by whatever means they construe it, it becomes otherwise from that. In other words, whatever the ground on which you might base a state of becoming, a sense of yourself and the world you inhabit, by the time that state of becoming has taken shape, the ground has already changed. So, giving priority to non-fashioning, he neither exalts himself for the attainment of the dimension of neither perception nor non-perception, nor disparages others. This is the quality of a person of integrity. MN 113. Non-fashioning is a principle that can be applied at many levels. When applied to a particular activity, it helps to pry loose any sense of conceit or identification that might surround that activity. When applied to the most refined possible activity, the equanimity in the highest formless attainments, it brings the mind to the threshold of awakening. At that level, it lies beyond both the fabrication of exertion and onlooking equanimity, in a state of poise that is hard for the untrained mind to grasp, in that it neither moves like fabrication nor stays still like equanimity. Then a certain Devata, in the far extreme of the night, her extreme radiance lighting up the entirety of Jedda's grove, went to the Blessed One. On arrival, having bowed down to him, she stood to one side. As she was standing there, she said to him, "Tell me, dear sir, how you crossed over the flood." "I crossed over the flood, my friend, without pushing forward, without staying in place." "But how, dear sir, did you cross over the flood without pushing forward, without staying in place?" "When I pushed forward, my friend, I was whirled about. When I stayed in place, I sank, and so I crossed over the flood without pushing forward, without staying in place." The Devata, "At long last I see a Brahmin, totally unbound, who, without pushing forward, without staying in place, has crossed over the entanglements of the world." SN 1:1. However, when non-fashioning is mentioned in the canon, it usually follows on the mastering of the fabrications of exertion through the development of the factors of the path. MN 78, MN 113. At the same time as the highest and subtlest form of right effort, it has a purpose, true happiness and well-being. What do you think, monks? If a person were to gather or burn or do as he likes with the grass, twigs, branches, and leaves here in Jedda's grove, would the thought occur to you, "It's us that this person is gathering, burning, or doing with as he likes"? No, Lord. Why is that? Because those things are not ourself, nor do they belong to ourself. In the same way, monks, whatever isn't yours, let go of it. Your letting go of it will be for your long-term welfare and happiness. And what isn't yours? Form isn't yours. Feeling isn't yours. Perception, fabrications, consciousness isn't yours. Let go of it. Your letting go of it will be for your long-term welfare and happiness. MN 22. The progression from equanimity at the senses through equanimity based on concentration to non-fashioning shows that generic non-reactivity at the senses is not enough to engender the dispassion capable of uprooting all the causes of stress. To succeed in the practice, you have to want to put an end to stress, to actively ferret out the causes of stress, even those hidden in equanimity, and to be willing to employ any method required to uproot them. This is why desire is an integral part of the definition of right effort, as well as being part of the first base of power. One of the duties of right mindfulness is to keep these facts in mind so as to help direct right effort in its task. That, however, is only one of the ways in which right mindfulness is developed through the practice of fabricating right effort and right concentration. As it's trained to the point of right concentration in the midst of fabrication, keeping track of the origination and passing away of physical and mental states, right mindfulness provides a steady basis for observing the processes of both the truth of suffering and the truth of the path in action. In this way, right mindfulness helps to sharpen right view, at the same time providing itself with more precise memories of what does and doesn't work, so that it can remind right effort of more effective ways to lead to right concentration. Right mindfulness, when part of right concentration, also provides a level of refined pleasure that gives insight the strength it needs to abandon pleasures that deflect from the path. MN 14. With this improved level of steadiness, it's in a better position to remember the lessons gained from the past when they are appropriate to fabricating improved states of right concentration in the present. In short, as right mindfulness is developed into right concentration, it can more effectively remember to provide information from the past to apply to the present. At the same time, by remembering to provide a solid frame of reference in the present, it enables right view to be more effective in picking up precise information from the present that right mindfulness will be able to carry into the future. This connects with the point noted in the quotation from SN 4811 in Chapter 1, that the practice of right mindfulness not only applies mindfulness to the present, but also strengthens mindfulness for the sake of future practice. As for why the lessons of fabrication are so important in this process, that's an issue of right view that we will discuss in the next chapter. Because right view is so intimately connected with right concentration and right effort, this will entail looking at many of the same points we have just covered, but from a slightly different angle. The added depth of perspective provided by right view, particularly in its most detailed explication as dependent co-arising, should more than compensate for any repetition this will involve.